Have you ever, in perfect silence, heard a whisper of your name? Or caught a flicker of movement in an empty room out of the corner of your eye? That isn't your imagination. It's an echo, the echo of a long-forgotten story, trying to be remembered. Welcome to Echoed Chronicles, the place where we listen to the stories that never truly died. The key slid into the lock with a satisfying, solid click. It was a brassy, old-fashioned key for a heavy, dark green door, the kind of door that made you feel secure. Leo turned it, the deadbolt retracting with a heavy thud, and pushed his way into the cool, still air of his new home. The air inside smelled of papery old wood, faint paint, and the clean, vacant scent of a place that had been empty for a few weeks. It was the left-hand side of a duplex in Portland's Selwood-Moreland neighborhood. A tall, slightly narrow-looking house from the 1920s with a shared porch and separate entrances. His side was 4827A. The other, 4827B, was a mirror image. He dropped a cardboard box labeled Kitchen Fragile just inside the door, the sound echoing in the high-ceilinged entryway. His back ached, a dull throb from hours of lifting and carrying. Outside, the June sky was a blanket of soft, uniform gray, threatening a drizzle that never quite committed. It was typical for this time of year. Leo ran a hand through his sweat-damp hair. This was it. A new start. A new city. A clean break from the life he'd shared with Clara in Sacramento for the last 6 years. The duplex was a good find, or so he told himself when he signed the lease online after a virtual tour. The rent was reasonable for the area. It had original hardwood floors, and a small, fenced-in backyard that his golden retriever, Gus, would have loved. A sharp pang of grief hit him, fresh as it was 6 months ago. He'd lost Gus and Clara in the same season, one to old age, the other to the slow, quiet erosion of a relationship that had run its course. The silence in the duplex felt immense, a stark contrast to the comfortable noise he'd grown accustomed to. Over the next few days, he worked methodically, turning the empty shell into a home. He unpacked boxes, assembled his IKEA desk in the spare bedroom he'd designated as his office, and set up his dual monitors and Wacom tablet. As a freelance graphic designer, his office was his sanctuary and his factory. The silence was a good thing, he reasoned. It would be good for focus. He knew he had a neighbor. He'd seen a car, a nondescript gray sedan, parked in the other half of the driveway. He'd heard a door close once or twice, but he hadn't seen the person. The landlord, a harried man named Mr. Henderson, had mentioned him only briefly. Quiet guy, keeps to himself. You'll probably never see him. His name was Julian, according to the mailbox next to his own. The first odd thing happened on a Tuesday night, his 4th night in the house. He was lying in bed, the foreign creaks and groans of the old house still a novelty. Around 2 in the morning, a thirst pulled him from a light doze. He swung his legs out of bed, the floorboards sighing under his weight. As his feet hit the floor, he heard it. A faint, identical sigh of floorboards from the other side of the wall. He froze, listening. Silence. He must have imagined it, or maybe it was just the house settling. He walked out of his bedroom and down the short hallway to the kitchen. As his bare feet padded across the wood, he heard a faint, whisper-soft echo of footsteps from next door, perfectly in sync with his own. He stopped in the middle of the kitchen, his heart suddenly beating a little faster. He was being ridiculous. It was an old duplex with thin walls. Sound traveled. His neighbor probably just got up for a glass of water, too. Coincidence. He stood perfectly still for a full minute, straining his ears. Nothing. Just the low, mournful hum of his new refrigerator. He shook his head, filled a glass with water from the tap, and drank it down. As he walked back to his room, he listened again. Silence. He must have been jumpy, his senses on high alert in the new environment. But it happened again the next morning. He woke up at his usual time, 7:30, and switched off his phone alarm. The moment the alarm went silent, he heard a faint click from the other side of the bedroom wall, as if another alarm had been silenced at the exact same instant. He lay in bed, listening. He heard the sound of a bed creaking, then the soft thud of feet hitting the floor. It was a perfect mimicry of his own movements just moments before. This time, the feeling was less jumpiness and more a prickle of genuine unease. He got up and went to the bathroom. He turned on the shower, and a moment later, he heard the faint rush of water from the other side of the wall. The pipes groaned in tandem. He stood there, water steaming up the room, and felt a strange, unnerving sense of being watched, not with eyes, but with ears. Leo tried to rationalize it. The man, Julian, probably worked from home too. Maybe they were just on a similar schedule. It was a logical, comforting thought. He focused on his work, losing himself in a branding project for a new line of organic dog food, the irony of which was not lost on him. He put on his noise-canceling headphones, blasted a playlist of instrumental post-rock, and forced the weirdness from his mind. That evening, he decided to test it. He made dinner, ate while watching a show on his laptop, and washed the dishes. The entire time, he listened. There were the corresponding sounds of activity from next door, the clink of silverware, the running of water, but they were slightly offset, not the perfect, creepy mirroring from the morning. He felt a wave of relief. He'd been overthinking it. He was just lonely and on edge in a new place. Around 10 o'clock, he shut down his laptop and stood up from the couch. On a whim, he decided to walk to the kitchen, then turn around and walk back to the living room, a pointless little trip. He took 4 steps on the old wood floor. For faint, identical steps echoed from next door. He stopped. They stopped. He took another 2 steps. 2 more steps from Julian. A cold knot of dread tightened in his stomach. This was not a coincidence. It was deliberate. He stood motionless in his living room for what felt like an eternity, the silence pressing in on him. The only sound was the frantic thumping of his own heart. On the other side of the wall, there was only silence. Patient, listening silence. The next day, the mirroring continued with unnerving precision. When Leo opened his refrigerator, he heard the soft suction pop of another refrigerator door next door. When he coughed, a dry, phantom cough answered from the other side of the wall. It was a game, he realized. A sick, one-sided game that he had no idea how to play or why he was a part of it. He felt like a specimen under a microscope. Every mundane act, every unconscious noise he made, was being registered, catalogued, and mimicked. He found himself trying to be quiet, moving through his own home like a burglar. He'd step softly, close doors with painstaking care, and even hold his breath. But Julian was better. No matter how quiet Leo was, he could hear the faintest corresponding sound. A tiny creak in the floorboards would be met with an identical one. It was as if the neighbor had superhuman hearing, or the wall between them was little more than a sheet of paper. Paranoia began to seep into the edges of his day. He started to wonder what else Julian knew. Could he hear his phone conversations? The client calls where he tried to sound confident and professional? Could he hear the soft, choked sobs that sometimes escaped him late at night when the loneliness and grief for Gus and Clara became a physical weight on his chest? The thought made his skin crawl. His home, his sanctuary, no longer felt safe. Felt like a shared cage. On Saturday, Leo decided he couldn't take it anymore. He had to see this person. He had to confront him. What would he even say? "Hi, are you deliberately copying every sound I make?" Sounded insane. But living like this was even more insane. He waited until he heard the front door of 4827B open and close. He rushed to his own front window, peering through the blinds. The gray sedan was still there. No one had left. The sound must have been another part of the mimicry, a response to some unheard cue from his own side of the house. He resolved to wait outside. He grabbed a book and a folding chair and set them up on his small patch of front lawn, pretending to enjoy the weak afternoon sun. He sat there for 3 hours. He read the same page a dozen times, his eyes constantly flicking towards the green door of 4827B. It remained shut. No curtains twitched. No sign of life at all except for the certainty that someone was in there, listening. As the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the lawn, Leo gave up. He folded his chair, his frustration curdling into a sense of helpless anger. As he walked back to his own door, he heard a sound from inside his house. A distinct, sharp rap on the wall that separated his living room from his neighbors. It wasn't a mimicry, it was a new sound, a communication. It sounded like a knock. Leo stood frozen on his porch, his key halfway to the lock. The knock came again, 3 quick, decisive raps. It was coming from inside his own home, but it felt like it was directed at him. A summons from the silent man on the other side. He didn't know what was worse, the mimicry or this new, direct acknowledgement of his presence. He unlocked his door, his hand trembling, and stepped inside. The house was silent again, but the silence felt different now. It was no longer empty. It was waiting. He spent Sunday in a state of agitated paralysis. The mirroring had stopped. The silence from next door was absolute, a void. It was impossibly more unnerving than the mimicry. The game had changed, and he didn't know the new rules. He considered calling the landlord, Mr. Henderson, but what would he say? My neighbor is too quiet? He imagined the conversation, the dismissal. He'd sound like a crank. He tried to work, but he couldn't focus. Every few minutes, he'd find himself staring at the shared wall, as if he could see through the plaster and laugh to the man on the other side. Who was he? What did he want? The questions circled in his mind, relentless and unanswerable. Was this some kind of psychological harassment? A bizarre prank? Or was it something else? Something he couldn't even begin to comprehend? Late that night, unable to sleep, he found himself Googling the address of the duplex. He scrolled through old real estate listings, property records, and local news archives. He found nothing of note. It was just a house, an ordinary house on an ordinary street. He looked up Julian's name, but the search results were generic. 12 men with the same name, none of whom seemed to fit the profile of a phantom neighbor in a Portland duplex. Defeated, he closed his laptop. The room was dark, lit only by the faint orange glow of a streetlight filtering through the blinds. And then he heard a new sound. It wasn't a knock or a mimicry. It was music, faint, tinny, and old-fashioned. It sounded like a waltz, played on a badly tuned piano. The melody was simple, almost childlike, but it rose and fell with a strange, melancholic rhythm. It was coming from Julian's side. Leo sat up in bed, straining to hear it more clearly. The music played for about 10 minutes, the same looping, sorrowful tune, and then, as abruptly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than before, thick with the ghost of the strange melody. The next morning, Leo woke up feeling exhausted and frayed. He decided on a new tactic: avoidance. He would spend as little time in the house as possible. He packed up his laptop and drove to a coffee shop in the Hawthorne district, an area buzzing with life and noise. He sat there for hours, fueled by overpriced lattes, and managed to get a good amount of work done. The constant chatter, the clatter of ceramic mugs, the hiss of the espresso machine, it was a balm to his frayed nerves. Felt normal. When he finally returned to the duplex in the late afternoon, a package was on his doorstep. It was a large, flat cardboard mailer addressed to him. He didn't remember ordering anything. He picked it up and took it inside. The house was silent. He slit the package open with his keys. Inside was a single, large sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper. He unfolded it. It was a floor plan, an old, hand-drawn architectural blueprint of the duplex. His side, 4827A, and his neighbor's, 4827B. It was meticulously detailed, showing the layout of the rooms, the placement of windows, and the location of electrical outlets. He stared at it, confused. There was no note, no return address on the package other than a generic Portland sorting facility stamp. He spread the blueprint out on his dining table. It was mostly as he expected, a mirror image. His living room, his kitchen, his bathroom all had their twins on the other side. But then his eyes caught something. In the back of the house, in the wall between his bedroom closet and his neighbor's, there was a small, rectangular shape that was not on his side of the plan. It was a small, narrow space, about 2 feet wide and 6 feet long, labeled simply Access. It was a hidden corridor, a dead space sandwiched between the two units, accessible only from a door drawn into the back of Julian's closet. A wave of cold dread washed over him, so intense it made him feel dizzy. The mimicry, the perfect, synchronous sounds. It wasn't superhuman hearing. Julian wasn't just listening through the wall. He was in the wall. The footsteps Leo had heard weren't in his neighbor's kitchen. They were in that narrow passage, just inches from his own. The idea was so monstrous, so violating, that he almost threw up. His entire home, every room, was bordered by this secret corridor. The man wasn't just his neighbor. He was his silent, unseen roommate. His mind reeled. He thought of the knock on the wall. It wasn't a knock from next door. It was a knock from that crawlspace. He thought of the silence, the way Julian seemed to know his every move even when he was trying to be stealthy. He wasn't just listening. He was pacing him, shadowing him from within the very structure of the house. Who sent the blueprint? Was it a warning? A threat? A cry for help from a previous tenant? Or was it from Julian himself, another move in his twisted game, letting Leo know that he knew? The ambiguity was torture. He grabbed his phone, his fingers shaking, and dialed the landlord, Mr. Henderson. It rang 3 times before a gruff, impatient voice answered. "Henderson. Mr. Henderson, it's Leo from 4827A, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I have a strange question about the house. What is it? The garbage disposal on the fritz again? No, nothing like that. I was wondering about the layout of the building. Is there some kind of maintenance passage or a space between my unit and 4827B? There was a pause on the other end of the line. A what? No, it's a duplex. There's a wall, the thick one at that, fire-rated. Why are you asking? I've been hearing strange noises, Leo stammered, feeling foolish, and I received a floor plan of the house in the mail today. It showed a hidden space. Henderson let out an exasperated sigh. Look, son, I've owned that property for 15 years. There's no secret passage. You're the 4th tenant in that unit since I bought it. You're the first one to call me with ghost stories. Are you having trouble with the other tenant? With Julian? I haven't even met him, Leo admitted. Exactly. He pays his rent on time, he doesn't make a peep. Best tenant a man could ask for. Whatever you think you're hearing, it's just an old house settling. Or your imagination. Now, if there isn't a leak or a fire, I've got to go. The line went dead. Leo lowered the phone, feeling completely alone. Henderson's denial didn't reassure him. It made it worse. If the landlord didn't know about the passage, who did? He stared at the blueprint, the neat lines and labels suddenly looking like a map to his own personal hell. He had to know for sure. He went to his bedroom closet. It was a simple closet with a single rod for his clothes. The back wall was smooth, painted the same neutral beige as the rest of the room. He pushed his clothes to one side and ran his hands over the surface, pressing, searching for any give, any seam. Nothing. He knocked on it. Felt solid, just like a normal wall. But according to the drawing, on the other side of this plasterboard was a door. And beyond that door, Julian. The idea of sleeping in this room, with only a few inches of plaster and with separating him from that passage, from him, was unbearable. He spent the night on the couch in the living room, a kitchen knife on the coffee table next to him. He didn't sleep. He just listened. The house remained silent. The void next door was complete. It was the silence of a predator that knows it has been seen. The next few days were a blur of caffeine and fear. Leo lived on autopilot. He'd leave early in the morning for the coffee shop and stay until it closed, dreading the moment he had to return to the duplex. The blueprint lay on his dining table, a constant, damning reminder. The silence from Julian's side persisted. There was no more mimicry, no more music, no more knocks. It was as if the occupant of 4827B had vanished. But his car was still in the driveway. Leo knew he was there, waiting. One evening, he was working late at the coffee shop, trying to meet a deadline, when his phone buzzed. It was a text from a number he didn't recognize. The message contained a single link to a news article from a local Oregon paper, dated 7 years prior. His finger hovered over the link, a sense of premonition washing over him. He clicked it. The headline read, "Local man missing after bizarre incident at Selwood residence." He scanned the article, his blood turning to ice. It was about the previous tenant of 4827B, a man named Robert Amaze. Amaze had been reported missing by his family after weeks of no contact. When police had entered his apartment for a wellness check, they found it in a state of disarray. Furniture was overturned, but the strangest detail was what they found on the walls. Amaze had covered nearly every square inch of the shared wall with soundproofing foam, layers and layers of it, as if trying to block out an unbearable noise. In a notebook found on his kitchen table, he had written the same phrase over and over again. "He hears my thoughts. He's in the walls." The police had found no evidence of foul play, and his disappearance remained an unsolved mystery. The article mentioned the landlord, Mr. Henderson, who had described Amaze as a troubled but quiet man. Leo felt sick. He wasn't the first. This wasn't about him. It was about the house. It was about whoever or whatever was in 4827B. He scrolled back up to the text message. Who sent this to him, and why? He tried calling the number, but it went straight to a generic voicemail service that hadn't been set up. He packed up his laptop, his hands shaking so badly he could barely zip his bag. He couldn't go back to that house. Not tonight. He drove aimlessly for a while before pulling into the parking lot of a cheap motel off the I-5. He paid for a room in cash. The room was sterile and smelled of bleach, but it felt like a fortress. There was no shared wall, no silent neighbor, no hidden passage. He lay on the stiff bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, the words from the dead man's notebook echoing in his mind. He's in the walls. He stayed at the motel for 2 nights. It was a temporary solution, a costly one, and he knew it. He had a lease. All his belongings were in that house. He couldn't just walk away. On the 3rd day, he forced himself to confront the situation. He needed proof. He needed something more than a mysterious blueprint and an old news story before he could break his lease or go to the police and not be dismissed as a lunatic. He needed to see inside that passage. He drove to a hardware store and bought a cheap borescope camera, the kind plumbers use to inspect pipes. It was a small camera on the end of a long, flexible cable that connected to his phone. His plan was simple and it terrified him. He would drill a small, discreet hole in the back of his closet wall and feed the camera through. He would finally see what was in there. He returned to the duplex in the middle of the afternoon. The gray sedan was still parked in its spot. The house felt colder, more menacing than before. He went straight to the bedroom closet, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. He took a small drill bit and, taking a deep breath, pressed it against the plasterboard. The drill whirred to life, a shockingly loud noise in the dead silence. He pushed, and after a moment of resistance, the bit punched through into empty space. He had been right. There was a void behind the wall. He switched off the drill, his ears ringing. He waited, listening, expecting a sound from next door, a reaction. But there was nothing, just silence. With trembling hands, he threaded the borescope's thin cable into the tiny hole. He held his phone up, the screen flickering to life with the camera's feed. At first, all he saw was darkness and dust motes dancing in the camera's small LED light. He pushed the cable further in. The view on his phone resolved into a narrow, vertical space. The walls were raw, unfinished with studs and insulation. The floor was rough planking. It was exactly as the blueprint had depicted. Corridor. He angled the camera down. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dust, but there were tracks in it. Scuff marks. The path of someone pacing back and forth over and over for what must have been years. Then he saw something else. A wire. A thin, black wire running along the base of the wall on his side. He maneuvered the camera to follow it. The wire led to a small, metallic object pressed against the wall. It looked like a contact microphone, the kind that can pick up vibrations directly through a solid surface. There were dozens of them, spaced every few feet along the entire length of the corridor wall. His house was bugged from within its own bones. He felt a surge of vindication mixed with pure terror. He wasn't crazy. This was real. He continued to snake the camera further down the passage, his phone screen a tiny window into the secret world. And then the camera's light fell upon something that made his breath catch in his throat. At the far end of the corridor, near the floor, was a small, neat pile of objects. He zoomed in as best he could. There was a worn, leather dog collar. It looked exactly like the one Gus used to wear. Next to it was a framed photograph, facing away from him. And beside that, a small silver locket. A locket he recognized instantly. He had given it to Clara on their 3rd anniversary. He felt the world tilt on its axis. How was that possible? These weren't just items from his past. They were deeply personal, intimate tokens of his life before Portland. He had packed everything from the Sacramento house himself. These items were gone. He'd assumed they were lost in the move, packed in a box that had vanished, a casualty of the chaos. But they weren't lost. They were here, in this hidden space, collected, curated. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. This wasn't just some random creep who had fixated on him when he moved in. This was something else. This person, Julian, didn't just know him. He had been a part of his life, a shadow, long before Leo had ever heard his name. The news article, the blueprint, the timing of it all. It wasn't a warning from a stranger. It was a message from Julian. A taunt. Asterisk, I know you. I've always known you. Asterisk. He ripped the camera out of the wall, his mind a frantic mess of questions and impossible answers. Who was Julian? How could he have gotten those things? Was he someone from his past? Someone he knew in Sacramento? He racked his brain, trying to place the name, the face of this invisible tormentor, but came up blank. He had to get out, not just for a night, but for good. He started throwing his most essential belongings into a suitcase. His laptop, chargers, important documents, a few changes of clothes. He moved with frantic, jerky motions, his eyes constantly darting to the bedroom closet, to the shared wall. He felt exposed, watched. Every sound he made felt like a broadcast to the man in the walls. As he was about to leave, his phone buzzed again. Another text from the same unknown number. He opened it with a sense of profound dread. This time, it wasn't a link. It was a photo. A grainy, poorly lit photo taken from a low angle. It showed the corner of a room, a worn armchair, and on a small table next to it, a landline telephone. It was his parents' living room, in North Carolina, a photo taken from inside their house. Below the photo was a single line of text. Don't run, Leo. We have so much more to talk about. The phone felt like a block of ice in his hand. Leo stared at the image, at the familiar floral pattern of the armchair, the scuffed wooden leg of the end table, the beige plastic of the phone his father refused to replace. It was an image of domestic tranquility, but it was the most violent thing he had ever seen. It was a violation of a place he considered sacred, a place 2,800 miles away, a place he had fled to in his mind just moments before as a symbol of safety. His first instinct was a tidal wave of pure, white-hot panic. He needed to call them. He needed to hear their voices. His thumb shook as he navigated to his contacts and pressed Mom. The line rang, each pulse an eternity. He imagined the phone ringing in that quiet living room, the one in the photo. He imagined a hand reaching for it. But whose? Leo. Honey, what a surprise. Is everything all right? His mother's voice, warm and familiar, was a lifeline. Mom! He breathed, the word catching in his throat. Mom, are you okay? Is Dad okay? Of course we're okay, she chirped, a note of confusion in her voice. We were just watching Jeopardy. Your father is yelling at the television as usual. Why? What's wrong? You sound terrible. He struggled for an explanation that wasn't the raw, undiluted truth, which would sound like the ravings of a madman. I just had a bad dream. A nightmare. Felt very real. Oh, sweetie. Her voice softened with sympathy. Was it about Clara? Or Gus? No, he said, pacing the small, stale motel room. It was about you guys. Is everything normal? Has anything strange happened today? Anyone come by the house? Strange? No, not at all. The mail came. I spoke to Carol from next door over the fence. The most exciting thing that happened was a squirrel getting into the bird feeder again. She paused. Wait, that's not true. We did have someone stop by this morning. From the power company. Leo stopped pacing. His blood ran cold. The power company? Why? Oh, he was just checking the meter. Said they were doing routine diagnostics in the neighborhood. A very polite young man. He was only here for a minute. He had a clipboard and everything. Why all the questions, Leo? You're starting to worry me. Polite young man. With a clipboard. It was so simple, so mundane. So easy. Julian, or whoever he was, hadn't broken in. He had been invited. He had stood on their porch, maybe even stepped inside, and they had seen nothing but a uniform and a smile. The photo could have been snapped in a second through the window or an open door. No reason, Mom, he lied, the words ash in his mouth. Just being paranoid. Listen, can you do something for me? Just check the doors. Make sure they're locked. Leo, it's 7 o'clock in the evening. Of course the doors are locked. He could hear the mix of concern and exasperation in her tone. Are you sure you're all right? You sound so far away. I am far away, Mom, he said, the truth of the statement hitting him in a new, profound way. I'm fine, just shaken up. Tell Dad I said hi. I love you. We love you too, honey. Call again soon. And try to get some sleep. He hung up. His relief that they were physically unharmed immediately swamped by a toxic cocktail of fear and rage. The message was clear. Don't run. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Julian had demonstrated his reach. Running wouldn't save Leo. It would only endanger the people he loved. He was tethered. He sank onto the edge of the motel bed, the cheap comforter crinkling beneath him. He was trapped. He couldn't go to the police. A man is mimicking my footsteps, and he sent me a photo of my parents' living room, was a one-way ticket to a psychiatric hold. He couldn't confide in his friends or family without putting them in the crosshairs. He was utterly, terrifyingly alone in this. The game had been one of psychological warfare, of attrition. Now it had escalated. Julian had moved a queen across the board and put Leo's entire world in check. But why? What was the objective? What did this phantom want from him? Leo's mind raced back to the dog collar and the locket. Trophies. This wasn't just about the house in Portland. This went back further. Back to Sacramento. He spent the rest of the night with the lights on, his laptop open. He abandoned any pretense of work. His life was now a single, obsessive project. Finding out who Julian was. He started not with Julian, but with the other victim, Robert Amaze, the man from 4827B who had disappeared 7 years ago. Using public records databases he paid for with his credit card, he started digging. He found a last known address for Amaze's parents, a retired couple living in Bend, Oregon. He found a social media profile for a woman who appeared to be his sister, Sarah Amaze Peterson. Her page was mostly pictures of her kids and posts about her catering business. But as he scrolled back through the years, the photos became less frequent. 7 years ago, they stopped for a few months. When they resumed, there were posts about loss and memory. A photo of her and a man who must have been Robert. Another year without answers. We miss you every day, Rob. He felt a kinship with this missing man. This stranger who had scrawled, "He's in the walls," in a notebook. Robert had been here. He had heard the noises. He had felt the suffocating presence. And he had lost. The next morning, Leo checked out of the motel. He couldn't afford to keep bleeding money, and staying in one place felt like being a sitting duck. He couldn't go back to the duplex, which was no longer a home but the heart of the enemy's territory. So he began to live out of his car, a 2015 Honda CR-V that was now his entire world. He showered at a 24-hour gym he joined, worked on his laptop at the public library, and ate cheap food from grocery stores. He parked in different places each night, well-lit hospital parking lots, quiet residential streets, the back of a Walmart lot, never staying in the same spot twice. He had become a ghost in his own life. His days were spent at the Multnomah County Central Library in downtown Portland. The building's anonymity was a comfort. He sat at a corral in the corner of the third floor, surrounded by the quiet rustle of pages and the low hum of the building, and he researched. He used the library's computers, logging in as a guest, careful not to leave a digital trail that led back to him. He focused on Robert Amaze. He read every local news article about his disappearance. He found forums for unsolved mysteries where people speculated about what had happened. Most theories involved him simply walking away from his life or a drug deal gone bad. Only a few fringe commenters latched onto the he's-in-the-walls detail, spinning tales of ghosts or government conspiracies. None of it felt right. He needed to talk to someone who knew Robert, someone who had seen his descent. Taking a massive risk, he created a burner email account and composed a message to Sarah Amaze Peterson, the sister. He kept it vague and professional. Subject: Inquiry regarding Robert Amaze. Dear Ms. Amaze Peterson, my name is Leo Vance. I am an independent researcher looking into unsolved missing persons cases in the Pacific Northwest. The case of your brother, Robert, is one I find particularly compelling. I understand this is an incredibly sensitive topic, but I believe I may have come across some information that could be relevant. Would you be willing to speak with me, completely off the record? I can be reached at this email address. Asterisk. Sincerely, Leo Vance. He hit send, his heart hammering. It was a shot in the dark. She could ignore it, report it as spam, or even send it to the police. But it was the only lead he had. While he waited, he turned his attention to the duplex itself. He dug into the property's history, using the library's access to archived records. Built in 1926 by a pair of brothers, shipbuilders who had fallen on hard times. It had passed through half a dozen owners before Mr. Henderson bought it 15 years ago. There were no recorded fires, no major incidents, no newspaper mentions of anything sinister. It was, by all accounts, a boringly normal house. Except for one thing. He found the original building permits from 1926. He downloaded the scanned copies, his eyes poring over the faded, spidery handwriting and architectural diagrams. He compared them to the blueprint he had received in the mail. They were almost identical, with one glaring omission. The original city-approved plans did not contain the access corridor. That narrow, secret passage had been added off the books, a modification made after the final inspection. It had been part of the house's design from the very beginning, a hidden feature known only to its builders. A few days passed in this new, grim routine. He worked on his graphic design projects just enough to keep his clients from dropping him, his focus fractured. Every buzz of his phone sent a jolt of anxiety through him. He expected another text, another photo, another demand. But there was only silence. Julian was letting him stew, letting the fear and uncertainty do the work. Then, on a Thursday afternoon as he sat in his usual library spot, an email notification popped up. It was from Sarah Amaze Peterson. Mr. Vance, I don't know who you are or what kind of information you could possibly have after all this time. My family has been through enough. I've spoken to every detective and reporter there is to speak to. But Rob was my brother. If there is even the smallest chance you know something, I have to listen. I will be at the Stumptown Coffee on SE Division tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'll be wearing a red scarf. If you're serious, you'll be there. If this is some kind of cruel prank, please just leave me alone. Leo read the email 3 times. It was happening. He felt a surge of nervous energy. This was his first real step toward understanding. He would finally hear a first-hand account from someone else who had been touched by the darkness of that house. That night, he found a quiet street in the Laurelhurst neighborhood to park. He tried to sleep in the reclined driver's seat, but his mind was racing. He thought about the polite young man at his parents' door. He thought about the dog collar in the wall. He thought about Robert Amaze, covering his walls in foam, trying to silence a sound that only he could hear. Was he walking into a trap? Was Sarah actually Julian, luring him out into the open? The paranoia was a constant companion, whispering doubts into his ear. But he had to go. He had no other choice. The next morning, He arrived at the coffee shop early. He sat at a small table in the back, a position that gave him a clear view of the entrance. The place was busy, filled with the typical Portland morning crowd. At exactly 10 a.m., the door opened and a woman walked in. She was in her late 40s, with tired eyes and a tense set to her jaw. She was wearing a bright red scarf. It was her, Sarah. She scanned the room, her gaze passing over him without recognition. He stood up and gave a small wave. Her eyes locked on his, and she walked over, her expression wary. "Mr. Vance?" she asked, her voice low. "Leo," he said. "Please call me Leo. Thank you for coming." "I have 20 minutes, she said, not sitting down. "What is this about? What do you know?" He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Please, sit down. I'm not a reporter or a detective. I'm the person who lives in 4827A now." Sarah's face went pale. All the hardness in her expression collapsed, replaced by a look of profound pity and fear. She slowly sank into the chair. "Oh, you poor man," she whispered. "You have to get out of there. You have to leave right now." The barista called out an order for a macchiato, the sound sharp and jarring in the sudden, intense bubble of silence that had formed around their table. Leo leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper. "I can't. It's not that simple. He knows where my family lives. He's made threats." Sarah's eyes widened, a flicker of horrified recognition in them. "He?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "So you've seen him?" "No," Leo admitted, the word tasting like failure. "Never. I don't even know what he looks like. I only know his name is Julian. And I know about the passage." The color drained completely from her face. She looked down at her hands, which were clenched together on the table. "The passage," she repeated, the words hollow. "So it's real. Rob told me about it. I didn't believe him. The police didn't believe him. We thought he was having a breakdown, that he was delusional." "What did he tell you?" Leo pressed, feeling a desperate need to connect the dots, to see the whole monstrous picture. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "It started slowly, just like I imagine it did with you. He'd call me, complaining about his neighbor. At first it was just annoying things. The guy would play his TV too loud, stomp around at all hours. Normal neighbor complaints. But then it got weird. Rob said the neighbor was copying him. He said he'd flush the toilet, and the neighbor would flush his at the exact same time. He said he'd open a can of soup, and he'd hear a can opener on the other side of the wall. He became obsessed. He was convinced the neighbor could hear everything. The mimicry," Leo breathed. "He did that to me too. Rob started trying to catch him," Sarah continued, her gaze distant, lost in the memory. "He'd make random noises, tap on the wall, and he said the neighbor would always tap back in the same rhythm. He started whispering when he was on the phone with me. He was terrified. He said the neighbor was learning him. That was the word he used. Learning him." She paused, taking a sip of the water Leo had gotten for himself earlier, her hand shaking. "Then he started talking about the passage. He'd bought some kind of microphone, a stethoscope, and was listening to the walls. He said he could hear movement inside the wall between the apartments. He swore there was a space in there, and that the neighbor was using it to listen. He drew me a map of it on a napkin one day. It looked like something a child would invent to scare themselves. I told him he was being paranoid. I told him to see a doctor." Her voice cracked, and she looked up at Leo, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "That was the last time I was on his side. After that, every conversation was me trying to convince him he was sick, and him getting angrier and angrier that I wouldn't believe him. He started buying the soundproofing foam. He spent thousands of dollars. He told me he was trying to blind the ear in the wall. A few weeks later, he disappeared. The police report said he left a note," Leo said gently. "He hears my thoughts." Sarah nodded, wiping at her eye with the back of her hand. "They saw that and the foam, and they wrote him off as a paranoid schizophrenic who had a psychotic break and wandered off. Case closed, unofficially. But I never believed that. Rob was anxious, sure, and he'd had some depression, but he wasn't that. He was scared. And I didn't help him. The guilt in her voice was a raw, open wound. Did he ever mention the name Julian? Leo asked. She frowned, thinking. No. The man who lived in 4827A back then was an older gentleman. A retired accountant named Mr. Gable. He was quiet, frail. Rob even confronted him once on his lawn. Mr. Gable was terrified. He had no idea what Rob was talking about. He swore he was half-deaf and barely heard a thing. The police spoke to him too, and he was cleared of any involvement. He moved out a few months after Rob vanished. Said the whole situation had unnerved him. Leo felt a cold chill spread through him. So it wasn't the neighbor in 4827A. It was the house itself. Or rather, the person who had access to the secret passage. That person could have been anyone. It didn't matter who was officially renting the other unit. The phantom was a permanent resident. Julian wasn't just the current tenant of 4827B. He was the master of the house's hidden architecture. He had been there when Robert was there. He had been there when Mr. Gable was there. How many tenants had there been? How many lives had he learned? The items, Leo said suddenly. Did Robert mention anything being stolen? Small, personal things? Sarah's brow furrowed. Yes. How did you know? He was constantly losing things. His favorite coffee mug. A picture of our parents from his wallet. He was convinced the neighbor was somehow getting into his apartment and taking them, but he could never find any sign of a break-in. It was another thing we thought was part of his paranoia, that he was just misplacing things and blaming this imaginary bogeyman. He's not imaginary, Leo said, his voice grim. He has my dog's collar and a locket I gave my ex-girlfriend. I saw them, through a camera I put in the wall. Sarah just stared at him, her face a mask of dawning horror. The half-formed suspicions and fears she had lived with for 7 years were suddenly coalescing into a solid, undeniable monster. Who is he? She whispered. What does he want? That's what I'm trying to find out, Leo said. Your brother was right about all of it. The mimicry, the passage, the thefts. He wasn't crazy. He was being systematically terrorized. And I think I'm the next project. He told her everything. About the mirroring, the knock, the blueprint, the borescope camera, the trophies in the wall, the text messages, the photo of his parents' home. He laid the whole nightmare out on the table between them, and she listened, her initial skepticism replaced by a deepening dread. The news article, she said when he'd finished. The one you got in a text. Rob got one too, a few days before he vanished. It was an old article about a woman who had a nervous breakdown in the 90s. She lived in the duplex, 4827A, I think. Your side. The article said she claimed a whispering man in the walls was stealing her memories. She was institutionalized. Each new piece of information was like another shovelful of dirt on a grave. This had been going on for decades. A cycle. A predator who lived in the bones of a house, selecting a victim from the rotating cast of tenants, and then slowly, methodically, dismantling their sanity. I need to know who he is, Leo said, his voice hard. I've been looking into the property history, but I need a name. Not Julian, that's probably a fake. I need his real name. You said Rob confronted the neighbor, Mr. Gable. What about the landlord? Henderson. Rob called him, Sarah confirmed. Henderson told him the same thing he probably told you, that it's an old house, that he was imagining things. He dismissed him completely. Henderson has owned it for 15 years, Leo mused. Robert disappeared 7 years ago. The woman in the 90s was before his time. The one constant is the house, and whoever has the key to that passage. He paused. The builders, pair of brothers. What if one of them never left? It was a wild leap, but the whole situation was unmoored from normal logic. Leo, what are you going to do? Sarah asked, her voice filled with genuine fear for him. You can't go back there. You need to go to the police. Show them the texts, the photo. Show them this pattern. And what will they do? Leo countered. the frustration sharp in his tone. They'll go to the house. They'll knock on the door of 4827B. Julian won't answer, or he'll pretend to be a normal tenant. They'll ask Henderson for permission to search. He'll say no. They'll need a warrant. And what's the probable cause? A man who lives in his car says the boogeyman stole his dog's collar? They'll look at me and they'll see your brother. They'll see another paranoid man on the verge of a breakdown. And in the meantime, Julian will know I went to the cops. And he'll make another phone call. Or send another photo. He has me pinned. Sarah saw the terrifying logic in his words. She understood the trap he was in because her brother had been in the exact same one. So you're just going to live in your car until he decides he's done with you? No, Leo said, a grim resolve hardening in his eyes. I'm not going to be a victim. Robert tried to defend. He built a fortress of foam. I'm going to attack. I'm going to find out who this man is, and I'm going to expose him. How? I'm going to break into his apartment. The words hung in the air between them. Sarah looked at him as if he'd just announced he was going to swim to Hawaii. Are you insane? He's expecting you to do something desperate. It's a trap. It's the only place the answers are, Leo insisted. His name, his identity, why he's doing this. It's all in there. His computer, his mail, his personal effects. The man I've been running from is just a man. He has to eat, sleep, pay bills. There has to be a trace of him somewhere in that apartment. I just need to get in and out. Leo, don't. Please, just disappear. Change your name. Go somewhere he can't find you. And my parents? He shot back. Your brother tried to disappear. Look what happened to him. No, the only way this ends is if I end it. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the fear for his safety warring with the desperate, 7-year-old hope for answers about her brother. Finally, she nodded slowly. If you're going to do this, she said, her voice low and resigned, then you need to be smart about it. You need to know when he leaves. He never leaves, Leo said. His car is always there. Is it? She asked. Or is that just part of the illusion? Robert said the same thing. But one day he called me frantic. He said he saw the neighbor, Mr. Gable, leave in a taxi. But Gable's car was still in the driveway. He thought it was a trick. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe your man uses taxis or ride shares to avoid moving his car and tipping you off. It was a possibility Leo hadn't considered. He'd been so focused on the gray sedan that he'd failed to imagine other modes of transport. I need to watch the house, Leo said. But I can't get too close. He'll know. Sarah was quiet for a moment. There's a house, she said slowly, across the street and 2 doors down. An elderly woman named Mrs. Gable lived there. Gable? Leo asked, the name jolting him. Any relation to the man who lived in 4827A? His sister-in-law, Sarah confirmed. After Rob disappeared and Mr. Gable moved out, I spoke with her a few times. She felt terrible for what my family was going through. She always said she never trusted that duplex. She passed away 2 years ago. I know the house was sold, but I don't know who lives there now. But her front bedroom window had a perfect, clear view of your porch and driveway. It was a long shot, but it was better than nothing. Thank you, Sarah, Leo said, a feeling of gratitude momentarily cutting through the fear, for believing me, for helping me. Find out what happened to my brother, she said, her voice fierce. And for God's sake, Leo, be careful. He left the coffee shop with a renewed sense of purpose. The fear was still there, a cold stone in his gut, but it was now overlaid with a sharp, focused anger. He was no longer just a target, he was a hunter. He drove to the Selwood neighborhood, his old neighborhood, which now felt like a foreign country. He parked several blocks away and walked, his heart rate climbing as he approached the familiar street. He located the house Sarah had mentioned. It was a small, tidy bungalow with a well-tended garden. There was a Subaru in the driveway. Family home. Walking up to a stranger's door and asking to use their bedroom as a surveillance post was out of the question. He needed another way. He circled the block, his mind working, and then he saw it. Next to the bungalow was a tall, thick fir tree on the edge of the property line, in a small public park strip. Its lower branches were heavy and dense. If he could get up there, he'd be completely hidden from the street but have a clear, angled view of the duplex. That night, under the cover of darkness, he returned. Dressed in dark clothes, he scurried up the tree, the sticky sap clinging to his hands, the rough bark scraping his skin. He found a thick, stable bough about 15 feet up, a natural seat concealed by a curtain of green needles. From here, he could see it all. The duplex sat under the orange glow of the streetlights, looking deceptively peaceful. The gray sedan was in its usual spot. The dark green doors were shut. It was a silent, waiting stage. He had brought binoculars and a thermos of coffee, and he began his watch. The first few hours were a study in absolute stillness. No lights went on or off in 4827B. No movement flickered behind the windows. It was as if the place was uninhabited. He watched his own apartment, 4827A, and a wave of homesickness and violation washed over him. All his things were in there, hostages in a silent war. Around 3 a.m., a light flicked on in an upstairs window of 4827B. The bedroom cast a pale, yellow rectangle onto the lawn. Leo raised his binoculars, his heart pounding. The window was dark, covered by a thick curtain. He couldn't see in. The light stayed on for exactly 10 minutes, then flicked off. An hour later, the same thing happened with a downstairs window, the living room, on for 10 minutes, then off. It was a pattern, precise, mechanical, not the behavior of a normal human. He stayed in the tree until dawn, his body stiff and cold. Nothing else happened. As the sky lightened and the neighborhood began to stir with the sounds of early commuters, he climbed down, every muscle aching, and retreated to the anonymity of his car. He did the same thing the next night and the night after that. He lived a nocturnal existence, sleeping in his car during the day and keeping his vigil from the fir tree at night. The pattern of the lights was the same each time. Upstairs bedroom at 3 a.m. for 10 minutes. Downstairs living room at 4 a.m. for 10 minutes. It was a schedule. It was a simulation of life. On the fourth night, something changed. At 1:30 a.m., a black Prius, sleek and anonymous, pulled up to the curb a few houses down from the duplex. It didn't have the glowing rooftop sign of a taxi or the app sticker of a rideshare. It was just a private car. The driver's side door opened, and a figure got out. It was too dark and too far away to see a face, but the person was tall and thin, dressed in dark clothing. The figure walked briskly, with a strange, gliding gait, not to the front door of 4827B, but around the side of the house, disappearing into the shadows of the narrow gangway that led to the backyard. Leo held his breath, his binoculars glued to his eyes. He waited. 1 minute, 2, 5, nothing. The person did not emerge from the back. There was no back door on that side of the house. He knew that from the blueprint. Then a light came on. The upstairs bedroom of 4827B. It stayed on for 10 minutes. Then it went off. An hour later, the living room light came on. 10 minutes. The schedule was still being followed. But the person who had arrived never came back out the way they went in. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that there was another entrance. A secret one. The person hadn't gone into the backyard. They had gone into the house through some hidden door on the side. This was it. This was Julian. And he wasn't in the house. He had just returned. The black Prius remained parked at the curb. Leo watched it, his mind racing. Julian was back. But where had he been? And how long would he stay? This might be his only chance. He had to assume the Prius would be gone by morning. He waited, every nerve screaming. At 5:30 a.m., just as the first hint of gray was softening the eastern sky, the side of the house stirred. The same tall, thin figure emerged from the shadows, walked quickly to the Prius, got in, and drove away. The house was empty. This was his window. It might be hours, it might be days before Julian returned. He couldn't afford to wait. It was now or never. He climbed down from the tree, his whole body trembling with adrenaline and lack of sleep, and walked toward the duplex. He wasn't going to break in the front door. He was going to use the same entrance Julian did. He slipped into the narrow, dark space between the duplex and the neighboring fence. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and moss. He ran his hands along the wooden siding of 4827B, feeling for a seam, a latch, anything out of the ordinary. Halfway down the wall, his fingers brushed against it. A slight indentation. He pressed. A section of the wall, about 6 feet high and 2 feet wide, clicked and swung inward with a soft, well-oiled whisper. It wasn't a door. It was a perfectly disguised panel of the house's siding. He peered into the darkness beyond. It was a narrow utility space, filled with pipes and wiring. And on the far side, another door, an interior one. It was unlocked. He slipped through, pulling the outer panel closed behind him. He was inside the walls. He was in Julian's territory. He turned on the small flashlight on his phone and found himself standing at the entrance to the access corridor from the blueprint. He took a deep breath and stepped into the cramped, terrifying space, the space where his tormentor had walked. And then he moved toward the door that led into the apartment itself. The air in the corridor was thick and stale, heavy with the scent of old dust and something else, a faint metallic tang that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The beam of his phone's flashlight cut a nervous, trembling path through the darkness, illuminating the raw wood studs and the back of his own apartment's drywall. He could see the small hole he had drilled, a tiny, violated eye staring back at him. On the floor were the scuff marks, the path worn smooth by years of pacing. He was walking in the footsteps of a ghost. He reached the door that, according to the blueprint, led into the back of Julian's closet. It was a simple, unpainted wooden door with a small brass knob. There was no lock. Taking another shaky breath, Leo turned the knob. It rotated without a sound. He pulled the door open and stepped out of the wall and into the apartment proper. He was in a bedroom closet. It was almost entirely empty. A few wire hangers hung on the rod, bare and skeletal. The air inside the apartment was cool and strangely sterile, like a hotel room that had been meticulously cleaned but never lived in. It lacked the subtle, chaotic scent of human habitation. Stepping out of the closet, he found himself in the bedroom. It was a mirror image of his own, but stripped of all personality. A single bed was made with military precision, the gray blanket pulled taut, the single pillow perfectly centered. There was a small, empty nightstand and a bare dresser. No photos, no books, no clutter. The window was covered with a heavy, blackout curtain, identical to the one he'd seen from the tree. He moved through the apartment like a phantom himself, his socked feet making no sound on the clean hardwood floors. The bathroom was spotless. A single toothbrush stood in a cup by the sink. A bar of plain, white soap sat in the dish. There was nothing in the medicine cabinet. It was the bathroom of a man who didn't exist. The living room was just as ascetic. A simple, modern-style sofa faced a blank wall where a television might normally go. A small coffee table was empty save for a single, leather-bound notebook. His heart hammered against his ribs. This had to be it. He picked it up. The leather was smooth and cool. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was small, neat, and unervingly precise. It was a log, April 12th. Tenant 14A, Robert Amaze, installed new deadbolt. Research to make /model. Key bumping appears most effective. Acquisition of tools necessary. Asterisk April 17th. Tenant 14A made call to sister, Sarah. Expressed anxiety. He is beginning to notice the patterns. Good. He is more perceptive than 12A. This one will be interesting. Asterisk. Leo's blood ran cold. He flipped through the pages. It was a detailed, dispassionate chronicle of the psychological destruction of Robert Amaze. Every entry was clinical, analytical. It recorded Robert's phone calls, which Julian must have been listening to through the contact mics. It noted his purchases, his changing routines, his escalating paranoia. It logged the items stolen, the coffee mug, the photograph, and recorded Robert's reaction. Asterisk June 3rd. Tenant 14A has begun soundproofing. A predictable but futile escalation. The listening posts are vibration-based. The foam is irrelevant. It only serves as a monument to his helplessness. Asterisk. Asterisk June 21st. Final stage initiated. Subject has reached peak distress. Disengagement protocol active. He has been given the necessary narrative prompts. Expecting departure within 48 hours. Asterisk. The final entry for Robert Amaze was dated 7 years ago. Asterisk June 24th. Tenant 14A has vacated the premises. Unit is clear. Trophies collected. University pin. Father's photograph. Subject profile complete. Awaiting new subject. Asterisk. Leo felt a wave of nausea. This notebook was a serial killer's journal. But the victims weren't murdered. Their sanity was. He flipped to the end of the book. The last few pages were about him. Asterisk subject 15A. Leo Vance. Arrived June 12th. Profile, graphic designer, freelance. Recently ended long-term relationship, Clara. Grieving loss of pet, Gus. Subject is emotionally vulnerable, isolated. Ideal candidate, asterisk. Asterisk June 16th. Initiated phase 1, auditory mimicry. Subject is responsive. Shows signs of anxiety and confusion. Good initial progress. Asterisk. Asterisk June 21st. Deployed blueprint artifact. Subject has discovered the passage. Fear response is escalating as predicted. Call to landlord logged. Denial from Henderson provides excellent catalyst for feelings of isolation. Asterisk. Asterisk June 26th. Initiated phase 2. Psychological tethering. Deployed personal artifacts. Dog collar, locket, and remote threat vector, parental photograph. Subject has ceased using the domicile. This is an unexpected deviation. He is more resilient than anticipated. He has not broken. He is adapting. Asterisk. The last entry was from yesterday. Asterisk subject 15A is conducting surveillance. His methodology is crude but effective. He has discovered the secondary transport and the hidden entrance. He is becoming proactive. This is a fascinating development. Previous subjects focused on defense. 15A is preparing for offense. I must recalibrate my approach. Asterisk. Leo slammed the notebook shut, his hands trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. Julian knew. He knew Leo was watching him. He knew he would come here. He had probably anticipated it, even encouraged it. This whole apartment, this sterile, empty stage was set for him. The notebook was left out for him to find. It was another move in the game. He had to get out. He had the proof he needed. This notebook was everything. He shoved it into the waistband of his pants, at the small of his back, and pulled his shirt down over it. He turned to leave, and that's when he saw it. On the wall next to the entryway, there was a single, framed picture he had somehow missed. It wasn't a painting or a photograph. It was a class picture. A group of smiling third graders, squinting in the sun. It was from a school in Sacramento. His school. He stepped closer, his blood turning to sludge in his veins. He scanned the faces of the children, his former classmates. And then he found his own 9-year-old face, a gap-toothed, goofy grin. And standing right behind him in the back row, a tall, unnaturally solemn boy with dark, piercing eyes and a face that he had long forgotten, was a child he now knew. The nameplate under the photo read, Julian Crow. The memories came back in a flood, disjointed and hazy. Julian Crow, the weird kid, the one who never spoke, the one who would watch the other kids on the playground from a distance, his eyes tracking them with an unnerving intensity. He'd been an outsider, a ghost even back then. Leo hadn't thought of him in 20 years. How? Why? Why him? Why after all these years? His phone buzzed in his pocket. A violent, deafening sound in the absolute silence. He fumbled for it, his hands slick with sweat. A text from the unknown number. Asterisk, did you find what you were looking for? Leo? It's funny how things come full circle. You never saw me, but I always saw you. Asterisk. A second text came through immediately after. Asterisk, your time is up. I'm coming home. Asterisk. Panic, pure and undiluted, short-circuited his brain. He bolted. He ran from the living room, through the bedroom, and scrambled into the closet. He fumbled for the knob to the passage, his breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. He threw himself into the dark corridor and pulled the closet door shut. He didn't bother trying to be quiet. He sprinted through the passage, the beam of his phone bouncing wildly, and slammed through the hidden panel into the cool morning air outside. He didn't stop running. He flew down the side of the house, across the lawn, not even looking back. He expected to hear the sound of the black Prius screeching to a halt, to see Julian emerging from the car. But the street was quiet. The Prius was not there. It was another trick, another psychological jab. Julian wasn't on his way back. He was somewhere else, watching, monitoring, enjoying the show. He had let Leo in, let him find the notebook and the photo, and then sprung the trap from a distance just to watch him run. Leo reached his car, his lungs burning. He fumbled with his keys, unlocked the doors, and threw himself inside. He jammed the key into the ignition and peeled away from the curb, his tires squealing on the asphalt. He drove without thinking, his only instinct to put as much distance as possible between himself and that house. He drove for an hour, heading east on I-84, the rising sun in his rearview mirror. The city gave way to the suburbs, then to the rolling green hills of the Columbia River Gorge. He finally pulled over at a rest stop, his body shaking uncontrollably. He leaned his head against the steering wheel, the leather of the notebook digging into his back. He had the evidence. The notebook was a confession. It was a detailed log of methodical, long-term psychological torture against multiple victims. Combined with the testimony from Sarah Amaze Peterson, it was undeniable. He could go to the police now. He had to, but the fear was still there. Julian was smart. He was always a step ahead. He had let Leo take the notebook. Why? Was it poisoned? Was it a fake? Was it all part of a larger, more horrifying plan? I must recalibrate my approach, Julian had written. What was his new approach? Leo drove to the next town, a small community called Hood River. He found a diner and forced himself to eat, his stomach churning. He needed to think, to plan. He couldn't just walk into a police station. He needed a lawyer. He needed someone to help him present this information in a way that couldn't be dismissed. He spent the afternoon at the Hood River Public Library, using their computers to research lawyers in the Portland area specializing in harassment and stalking cases. He found a woman named Alana Reed whose profile seemed promising. She was a former prosecutor with a reputation for taking on difficult, unusual cases. He sent her a carefully worded email from his burner account, briefly outlining his situation and stressing the urgency and the existence of physical evidence. He booked a room at another cheap motel, paying in cash. That night, he barricaded the door with a chair and sat on the bed with the notebook, reading it from cover to cover. He tried to understand the mind that had produced it. Julian's entries were devoid of emotion. There was no anger, no joy, no hatred. There was only observation, analysis, and a chilling sense of purpose. He was a scientist, and people's lives were his experiments. He found the sections on the other tenants. Subject 12A, the woman from the 90s, was a young artist. Julian had manipulated her by subtly moving her art supplies, creating faint whispering noises through the walls using a series of hidden speakers, and stealing small, sentimental trinkets. She had descended into what her doctors called paranoia with auditory hallucinations. Subject 13A was a grad student who Julian had tormented by manipulating his research data via his unsecured Wi-Fi network and gaslighting him with sounds that mimicked a faulty carbon monoxide detector, leading the student to abandon the apartment in a panic over his health. Each case was tailored, bespoke, a unique masterpiece of cruelty. And between each major subject, there were brief notes on the tenants who weren't chosen. Asterisk applicant 14B, couple. 2 interconnected. External support network is strong. Poor candidate. Asterisk asterisk applicant 14C. Divorced father with weekend custody. Child presents too many variables. Unsuitable. Asterisk he chose his victims carefully. The lonely, the isolated, the vulnerable, people like Robert, People like Leo. The next morning, he received a reply from Alana Reed, the lawyer. Mr. Vance, * your email is unorthodox. However, the details you've alluded to are disturbing enough to warrant a conversation. I am available to meet this afternoon at my office in Portland. 2 p.m. Please be aware that my time is not free, and I will require a retainer for any services rendered. Bring your physical evidence. Let's see what you have. * Alana Reed, ESQ, Portland. He had to go back to the city where Julian was. The thought filled him with dread, but he had no choice. This was his only path forward. He got in his car and started the drive west, back toward the Lion's Den. The notebook felt like a lead weight under his shirt. He arrived in downtown Portland with an hour to spare. He parked in a secured underground garage, believing it was safer than the street. He walked the few blocks to Alana Reed's office, a modern glass and steel building. He felt exposed, his eyes scanning every face in the crowd, looking for a tall, thin man with dark, familiar eyes. Every person who glanced at him was a potential threat. Alana Reed's office was on the 12th floor. Her secretary led him into a conference room with a sweeping view of the city. A few minutes later, Alana walked in. She was a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her 50s with intelligent, no-nonsense eyes. "Mr. Vance," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "Alana Reed, you've had me intrigued. Please have a seat. Now, tell me everything, and don't leave anything out." For the next hour, Leo recounted the entire story, from the first mimicked footstep to the class photograph. He spoke clearly and calmly, trying to present the facts as rationally as possible. Alana listened intently, her face unreadable. She didn't interrupt. When he was finished, he pulled the leather-bound notebook from under his shirt and slid it across the polished table toward her. "This is his logbook," he said. "He details everything." Alana put on a pair of reading glasses and opened the notebook. She read for a long time, her expression growing more and more grim. She read the entries about Robert Amaze, the artist, the grad student. Then she read the entries about Leo. When she finally looked up, her professional mask had slipped, revealing a flicker of shock. "My God," she said softly. "This is monstrous." She looked at Leo with new eyes, a deep, professional concern replacing her initial skepticism. "Mr. Vance, Leo, I believe you, and I will help you." A wave of relief so profound it almost made him weep washed over Leo. He wasn't alone anymore. He had an ally. "What do we do?" he asked. "We go to the police," she said, her voice firm and decisive. "But we do it my way. I'm going to call a detective I know in the robbery division, a man named Sanderson. He's smart, he's thorough, and he owes me a favor. We're not going to file a report at the front desk. We are going to hand-deliver a criminal conspiracy to him on a silver platter. The notebook, your testimony, the information about the other victims. We're going to get a warrant for that entire house. And we are going to tear it apart." She picked up her phone. "We need to get you somewhere safe. A hotel, registered under my firm's name. You are not to go anywhere alone. This man, Julian Crow, he's escalated. He allowed you to take this notebook. That means he's moving to a new phase, and I'm afraid it might be the final one." As she was about to dial, her office phone rang. The secretary's voice came over the intercom. "Ms. Reed, there's a gentleman here to see you, a Mr. Crow. He says he's a potential new client, and that Mr. Vance recommended you." The name hit the air in the conference room like a physical blow. Leo felt the blood drain from his face, his heart seizing in his chest. He shot a look of pure terror at Alana, whose own eyes had widened in disbelief, her hand hovering over the phone. The cool, professional demeanor she had maintained throughout their meeting fractured, revealing the raw shock beneath. "He's here," Leo mouthed, his voice failing him. Alana held up a hand, signaling for him to stay silent. She pressed the button on the intercom, her voice remarkably steady. "Thank you, Maria. Tell Mr. Crow I am just finishing up with a client. I will be with him in 10 minutes. She released the button and stared at Leo, her mind clearly racing. Don't panic, she whispered, though her own face was pale. The reception area is on the other side of a locked door. He can't get in here. She stood up and walked to the door of the conference room, quietly engaging the deadbolt. The soft click echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. He knew, Leo rasped, his mind reeling. He knew I was coming here. He followed me, or he knew I would find you. The second one is more likely, Alana said, her voice a low, urgent hum. She was pacing now, the picture of controlled crisis. He's been watching you, studying you. He researched your background, your life in Sacramento. It's not a stretch to think he anticipated you would seek legal counsel and did his own research on reputable Portland attorneys. He's not just reactive. He's predictive. She stopped pacing and looked at Leo, her expression hard as steel. This changes things. We can't just call Sanderson and wait for a warrant. This man is brazen. He's here in my building. He's forcing a confrontation. What does he want? Leo asked, his gaze fixed on the locked door as if he expected Julian to phase through it. He wants to control the narrative, Alana said. He's coming to me as a potential client. He's going to claim that you are harassing him, that you're a disturbed, obsessed man who is stalking him. He will try to discredit you before you can discredit him. He's preempting our attack. She tapped a finger on the leather notebook on the table. And he knows we have this. He's not afraid of it. Why? The question hung in the air, sinister and terrifying. Why would Julian let him take the one piece of evidence that could destroy him? He's going to claim it's a work of fiction, Leo said, the horrifying realization dawning on him. He's a graphic designer like me. He could say it's part of a story I'm writing. My word against his. It's more than that, Alana countered, her eyes narrowing. This notebook contains details about Robert Amaze and other victims. Things you couldn't possibly know. It corroborates Sarah Amaze Peterson's story. It's damning. So why is he confident? What's his move? She went to the window, peering cautiously through the blinds down at the street 12 stories below. There's only one way to find out. We have him trapped. He thinks he has us trapped, but he's the one who walked into a cage. She turned back to Leo. I'm going to call Detective Sanderson right now. I'm going to tell him we have a Class A felon sitting in my waiting room. Response time for an active threat in a downtown office building is under 5 minutes. They'll seal the building. He's not walking out of here. He won't let himself be arrested, Leo said, a certainty gripping him. He's not the kind of person who gets caught. He'll have a contingency plan. Then we'd better be ready for it, Alana said grimly. She picked up her cell phone and dialed. Sanderson, it's Alana Reed. I need you. Now, I'm at my office. I have the perpetrator in a high-profile stalking and harassment case, potentially multiple cases, including the Robert Amaze disappearance, sitting in my waiting room. The subject's name is Julian Crow. He is a high-flight risk and is demonstrating extremely bold and unpredictable behavior. I need a unit here immediately. She listened for a moment. Yes, I am safe. I am in a locked conference room with the primary victim. The subject is in the reception area with my secretary. No, as far as I know, he is not armed, but I would proceed with extreme caution. His psychological state is highly volatile. She listened again. Thank you. She hung up. They're on their way, she told Leo. They're coming in silent. No sirens. They'll take control of the lobby and the elevators and then come up. He's got nowhere to go. The minutes that followed were the longest of Leo's life. He sat frozen, listening for any sound from beyond the conference room door. The quiet hum of the building's ventilation system, the distant traffic, everyday sounds that were now charged with an unbearable tension. He imagined Julian sitting calmly in the waiting room, perhaps flipping through a magazine, a predator waiting patiently for the walls to close in. Suddenly, the intercom on Alana's desk buzzed again, making both of them jump. Ms. Reed. It was Maria, her voice tight with panic. The man, Mr. Crow, he just stood up. He's walking toward the door. He said, "Please tell Ms. Reed our time is up. He's leaving." "Don't let him leave, Maria," Alana commanded into the intercom. "Stall him. He's not going to the main exit," Maria's terrified voice replied. "He's going toward the fire escape." Alana and Leo exchanged a look of pure dread. Of course, the fire escape, the one exit they hadn't considered. Alana rushed to the window, Leo right behind her. They looked down the side of the building, and there he was, a tall, thin figure in a dark jacket, moving with a fluid, spider-like grace down the metal rungs of the fire escape. He wasn't rushing. He was moving with a calm, deliberate speed. He was a man who had planned for this. "He's not going to make it," Alana said, half to herself, half to Leo. "They'll have the street level covered." As they watched, Julian descended another few floors. Then he did something unexpected. He stopped at a window, one that led to an office 2 floors below theirs. He produced a small tool from his pocket, and with a quick, efficient motion, he smashed the glass. He slipped through the broken window and disappeared from sight. "He's back inside the building," Leo exclaimed. "He's trying to get to a different elevator bank, a different exit," Alana realized. "He's creating chaos." Just then, they heard shouting from the hallway, followed by the sound of heavy, running footsteps. "Police! Open up!" Alana rushed to the door and unlocked it. 2 uniformed officers and a plainclothes detective, a large, grizzled man who had to be Sanderson, poured into the room, their weapons drawn but held in a low, ready position. "Reed, what the hell is going on?" Sanderson demanded. "Your secretary is a mess. Where is he?" "Fire escape," Alana said, pointing out the window. "He went down 2 floors and broke back into the building. He's somewhere on the 10th floor." Sanderson spoke into his shoulder radio, his voice clipped and authoritative. "Subject is mobile. He's on the 10th floor, west side. Seal all stairwells and elevators. I want a floor-by-floor sweep, starting now." He turned to Alana. "You and your client, stay put. This is now a crime scene." The next hour was a blur of activity. More police arrived. The building was placed on lockdown. Leo and Alana could hear officers sweeping the floors above and below them, their radios crackling with terse, coded messages. But there was no sign of Julian. He had vanished into the building's labyrinth of offices and corridors as if he were a ghost. Leo sat in the conference room, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving behind a cold, hollow fear. Julian had outmaneuvered them again. He had come to them, controlled the encounter, and then escaped a police dragnet in a downtown high-rise. He wasn't just smart, he was brilliant, and he was utterly fearless. Finally, Detective Sanderson came back into the room, his face grim. "He's gone," he said, without preamble. He broke into a law office on the 10th floor, crossed through their space to the service corridor, and took a maintenance elevator down to the sub-level parking garage. By the time my men got there, all they found was an open door. "There's a dozen ways out of that garage. He slipped through our fingers." Sanderson looked at Leo, his eyes appraising. "Alana gave me the short version. I've got a team heading to that duplex with a warrant right now. We'll find him. But until we do, you are a material witness in extreme danger. We're putting you in protective custody." Leo spent the night in a sterile, featureless room at a secure police facility. He couldn't sleep. He just replayed the day's events over and over. Julian's audacity, his own terror, the brief, shining moment of hope in Alana's office, now extinguished. The next morning, Sanderson and Alana came to see him. Sanderson was holding a thick evidence file. "We tossed the duplex," he said, his voice flat. "Both units." "And?" Leo asked, his heart sinking at the detective's tone. "And it was clean. Spotless. Too clean. We found the hidden passage, just like you said. We found the wiring for the contact mics. We even found the indentations in the dust where you said the trophies were." He paused. "But they're all gone. The notebook you gave us is the only piece of physical evidence we have connecting him to any of this." "What about his apartment?" Leo asked. 4827B? "It was empty," Sanderson said. "Not just empty like a person moved out. Empty like no one had ever lived there. No clothes in the closet. No food in the fridge. No fingerprints. No DNA, nothing. We ran the name Julian Crow through every database we have. The man who rented that apartment used a fake ID and a stolen social security number. As far as the system is concerned, he doesn't exist. Alana spoke up, her voice gentle. The class photograph, Leo. You're sure it was him? I'm sure, Leo said, his voice hollow. My office contacted the school district in Sacramento, Sanderson continued. They searched their archives. According to their records, there was no student named Julian Crow enrolled in that school, or any school in the district, at any time during that decade. The photograph in the apartment, it must have been a fake, a digital fabrication, another tool to terrorize you. Leo felt the floor drop out from under him. The one solid link he thought he had to his tormentor's past, the one thing that made him real, was just another illusion. Julian wasn't a ghost from his past. He was something else entirely. He had no history, no identity. He was a phantom who had built an entire persona just for him. But why? Leo whispered. Why go to all that trouble? Why me? That's the question we can't answer, Sanderson admitted. We're treating this as a high-priority case. We've got an APB out on the Black Prius and a sketch artist working with your description and Alana's secretaries. But for now, he's in the wind, and he's focused on you. So what happens now? Leo asked. Do I just stay in protective custody forever? For now, yes, Sanderson said. It's the only way to guarantee your safety. He's out there, Leo, and after what happened yesterday, he's been challenged. A man like that won't just let it go. He'll be coming for you. Days turned into a week. Leo existed in a state of suspended animation, trapped in a secure room while the world went on without him. He was safe, but he was a prisoner. Alana kept him updated, but there was no news. Julian had vanished without a trace. The Black Prius was never found. The sketch produced no leads. The duplex sat empty, a silent monument to the horror he had endured. On the 8th day, Detective Sanderson came to his room. He looked tired. There's been a development, he said. We got a hit on some of the equipment we found in the walls of the duplex. The contact microphones. They're high-end, specialized pieces of audio equipment. Not something you buy at Radio Shack. We traced the serial numbers. Leo sat up, his heart quickening. And they were part of a batch sold 2 years ago to a company in Seattle. A private security firm. A very discreet, very expensive one called Acoustic Shadow Technologies. What kind of company is it? Leo asked. On paper, they do high-tech security consultations for corporations. Threat assessment, counter-surveillance, that kind of thing. But from what I can gather, their real business is darker. They're information brokers. They specialize in acquiring information by any means necessary. They're ghost, digital and physical spies for hire. So Julian is a corporate spy? Leo asked, confused. I don't think he's an employee, Sanderson said, shaking his head. I think he might be the one who runs it. We've been digging into their corporate structure. It's a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts. But we found a name. The sole registered agent, the owner, is not Julian Crow. It's a name that has no criminal record, no public profile at all. But it's a real person, a man named Alistair Finch. The name meant nothing to Leo. And you think this Alistair Finch is Julian? We think it's the beginning of a trail, Sanderson said. We're working with the Seattle PD now. We're going to pay a visit to Acoustic Shadow Technologies. But this is bigger than a simple stalking case. This is a well-funded, highly sophisticated operation. The question is, who would hire a firm like this to terrorize a graphic designer from Portland? The question hung in the air, vast and unanswerable. Leo's personal nightmare was expanding, twisting into something far larger and more incomprehensible. He wasn't just the subject of one man's sick game. He was a target. But a target for whom and why? That night, as Leo lay in his bed, the name Alistair Finch echoed in his mind. He tried to sleep, but his thoughts were a frantic storm. He thought of Clara. He thought of his work. He tried to find a thread, any thread, that could connect him to the shadowy world of corporate espionage. Around 2 a.m., the guard outside his room unlocked the door and delivered a sealed manila envelope. "Came for you from Detective Sanderson," the guard said. He said it was urgent. Leo's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside wasn't a report or a document. It was a single, glossy photograph. It was a picture of a man, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, getting out of a black sedan. He was tall, thin, with dark hair, wearing an expensive suit. His face was in profile, but it was him. It was the man from the fire escape. The man he now knew as Julian or Alistair Finch. But it was the person he was meeting that made Leo's breath catch in his throat. Standing on the sidewalk, shaking Alistair's hand, was a woman with familiar blonde hair. It was Clara. The photograph felt slick and unreal in Leo's hands. A portal to a reality he couldn't comprehend. Clara. Her face was tilted away from the camera, but it was unmistakably her. The way she stood, the expensive trench coat she'd bought the last winter they were together, the confident set of her shoulders. It was her, and she was shaking hands with the man who had systematically dismantled his life. He stared at the image, trying to make it compute. The background was a nondescript urban street, a brick building with large windows. The black sedan was different from the Prius, more luxurious. This wasn't a recent photo. The trees in the background were bare, suggesting late autumn or winter. This had happened months ago, before he even moved to Portland. He flipped the photo over. Scrawled on the back in Sanderson's blocky handwriting were 3 words. *Seattle. Last November. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening, horrifying finality. Clara hadn't just left him. She had set this in motion. The breakup, his move to Portland, the specific duplex he'd rented. It wasn't a series of unfortunate events. It was a plan, a meticulously executed operation. His mind reeled back to their final months together in Sacramento. The slow, quiet erosion he had attributed to the natural death of a relationship. Had it been an act? Her increasing distance, the arguments that seemed to come from nowhere, her gentle but firm insistence that they needed a clean break. She had been the one who first suggested he look for a new start somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. "You've always talked about Portland, Leo," she had said. "The creative scene there would be so good for you." He had seen it as a sign of her lingering affection, a desire for him to be happy even as they parted. Now he saw it for what it was, a shepherd guiding a lamb to the slaughter. But why? He sank onto the edge of the cot, the photo trembling in his hand. They had been together for 6 years. He thought he knew her. What could he possibly have done to inspire this level of vindictive, elaborate cruelty? They hadn't fought over money. Their finances were separate. There was no bitter custody battle over a child. Their breakup, on the surface, had been sad but civil. He thought about his work. He was a freelance graphic designer. His clients were small businesses, startups, a local brewery. He designed logos and websites. He wasn't involved in corporate intrigue or government secrets. His life was mundane. That's what had made him the ideal candidate, according to Julian's notebook. Or was that just another lie? Was there something in his work, some client he'd taken on, some file on his hard drive that he had overlooked? He felt a new kind of dread creeping in, colder and more profound than the fear of a phantom in the walls. The terror had been random, inexplicable. This was personal. This was a betrayal so deep it fundamentally altered his understanding of the last 6 years of his life. The man in the walls was just a contractor. The architect of his suffering was the woman he had loved. The door opened and Sanderson stepped in, his face grim. He saw the photo in Leo's hand, the look on his face. "I'm sorry you had to see it like that, son," he said quietly. "We got it from the Seattle PD an hour ago. They've had this acoustic shadow firm under low-level surveillance for a while. Suspected them of illegal industrial espionage. The photo was in their files. They didn't know who the woman was until we sent them your case file with her name in it." "Clara," Leo whispered, the name tasting like poison. "Her name is Clara Webb." "We know," Sanderson said. "We're running a full background check on her now. Financials, travel records, communications. But I need you to think, Leo, all those years you were with her, was there anything, any connection to a firm like this? Any powerful enemies you might not know you made? Leo shook his head, his mind a fog. No, nothing. She's a project manager for a construction company. A big one, but still, it's just buildings. Our life was normal. The word sounded hollow and absurd now. Then we're missing a piece of the puzzle, Sanderson said. And I have a feeling it's a big one. I'm having you moved, tonight, to a new location. This changes the threat level. We're not just dealing with a rogue operative anymore. This is a conspiracy, and Clara Webb and Alistair Finch know that we're onto them. They'll be desperate. The new location was a drab, windowless room in the basement of the Justice Center. It was less like protective custody and more like a cell, but Leo barely noticed his surroundings. He was lost in a maze of memory, re-examining every conversation, every shared moment with Clara for the last 6 years, searching for the lie. He found it everywhere. It was in her smile, in her touch, in the way she'd listened to him talk about his day. It had all been a performance. 2 days later, Sanderson came back. He looked like he hadn't slept. He was holding a file, but he didn't open it. "We found it," he said. "The why. It's not about you, Leo. Not directly. It's about your father." Leo stared at him, bewildered. "My father? He's a retired history professor. He lives in North Carolina. What does he have to do with any of this?" 25 years ago, before he was a professor, your father, Michael Vance, was a civil engineer, Sanderson explained, his voice low. He worked for a firm that was contracted by the government. He was a lead inspector on a massive federal infrastructure project, a series of hydroelectric dams in the Pacific Northwest. The detective paused, letting the words sink in. One of those dams was built by a company called Titan Construction, the same company where Clara Webb is now a senior project manager. A cold, intricate web was beginning to form, its threads stretching back decades. "What happened with the project?" Leo asked. "Your father," Sanderson said, "was a whistleblower. He discovered that Titan was using substandard materials and cutting corners on safety protocols to save money. He documented everything, falsified stress tests, fraudulent supply manifests, the works. He filed a report, flagging the project as structurally unsound and a massive public safety risk. Titan's executives tried to bury it, to discredit him, but your father held his ground. He leaked his findings to a journalist." Sanderson finally opened the file. He slid a faded newspaper clipping across the table. The headline read, "Dam Project Halted Amid Safety Scandal. Inspectors Report Cites Catastrophic Risk." "The fallout was huge," Sanderson continued. "The project was shut down. Titan Construction was hit with massive fines and was federally barred from bidding on government contracts for 10 years. It nearly bankrupted them. Several executives were fired. One of them, the lead supervisor on the project, was a man named Richard Webb." The name hit Leo like a punch to the gut. "Webb? Clara's. Her father," Sanderson finished. "He lost his job, his reputation, everything. According to our background check, he blamed your father for ruining his life. He died of a heart attack 2 years later. Clara was 16. It all made a horrible, perfect sense. This was revenge. A vendetta that had been simmering for 25 years. Clara hadn't stumbled into his life by accident. She had sought him out. She had spent 6 years embedding herself in his life, learning his weaknesses, earning his trust, all in service of a long-nursed grudge against a man she'd never met, his father. "She wanted to destroy me to get back at my dad?" Leo said, his voice laced with disbelief. "To make him suffer by watching his son have a nervous breakdown? That was phase 1, Sanderson said grimly. "The psychological torment, the gaslighting, making you look like an unstable paranoid, just like they tried to do with your father. But there's a phase 2. While you were being terrorized in that duplex, Clara Webb was using her position at Titan to push for a new government contract. A multi-billion-dollar project to retrofit and recommission the very same dam your father shut down." He pulled out another document. "This is a proposal submitted by Titan. They argue that the original structural flaws can now be fixed with modern technology. It's a huge, lucrative contract. But there's a problem. To get final approval, they need the original classified inspection reports from the first project to be declassified. Reports that your father authored. And what's in the reports? Leo asked. We don't know for sure. They're sealed. But our guess is that they contain your father's original raw data. Data that might prove that the dam is not salvageable. Data that could kill Titan's new project for good. So they needed to discredit him again, Leo realized. And this time they're using me. Exactly, Sanderson confirmed. Imagine the hearing. Your father, Michael Vance, stands up to testify about his old findings. And then Titan's lawyers present a dossier on his son. A son who has recently been institutionalized, or disappeared under mysterious circumstances, or perhaps even implicated in a crime. A son whose psychological collapse can be attributed to genetic predispositions to paranoia and delusion. They would argue that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. They would use your breakdown to paint your father as an unstable, unreliable narrator. They would invalidate his original report by association. It's diabolical. And Alistair Finch was the man they hired to make it happen. The sheer, cold-blooded patience of the plan was staggering. Clara had invested years of her life in this. She had faked a relationship, orchestrated his move, and then unleashed a sociopath on him, all to settle a decades-old score and win a construction contract. His home, his grief for Gus, his sanity, it had all just been collateral damage in a corporate war. Where is she? Leo asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Where is Clara? She's gone to ground, Sanderson said. Cleared out her apartment in Sacramento yesterday, and Alistair Finch has fallen off the map. They know we're onto them, but they're not going to just give up. Not when they're this close. The declassification hearing for your father's reports is in 2 weeks, in Washington, D.C. They're going to go after my father, Leo said, a surge of protective fury cutting through his shock. We think so, Sanderson agreed. We've already dispatched a team to his house in North Carolina. He and your mother are under police protection, but Finch is a ghost. He could already be there, waiting. This isn't just about you anymore, Leo. This is about stopping them before they can get to your dad. I have to get out of here, Leo said, standing up. I can't just sit in a basement while my parents are in danger. I was his target. I know how he thinks. I can help. That's out of the question, Sanderson said firmly. You're the key witness. I can't risk putting you in the field. What if I'm not a witness? Leo countered, his mind racing. What if I'm bait? Sanderson and Alana, who had entered the room behind him, exchanged a look. What are you proposing? Alana asked cautiously. Finch's plan is ruined, Leo explained, thinking out loud. His primary weapon, my psychological collapse, is gone. I'm not broken. I'm angry, and I'm talking to the police. He and Clara have lost the element of surprise, but they still need to neutralize my father before that hearing. They've lost their subtle weapon, so now they'll have to use a blunt one. He looked from Alana to Sanderson. But they still have a fixation on me. I'm the one who beat the game. Finch, in his own twisted way, he's a professional. He's not used to losing. I'm the loose end. He won't be able to resist coming after me if he thinks I'm vulnerable. If I leave police protection, if I look like I'm running scared, he'll see an opportunity to clean up the mess. It's too dangerous, Sanderson said immediately. We have no idea what he's capable of in a direct confrontation. We can control the environment, Alana interjected, her legal mind already seeing the angles. We set the stage. We choose the location. We make it look like Leo is breaking down, running from the pressure, leaving police protection against our advice. We leak it. We let Finch's sources hear that Leo Vance is unstable and on his own. Then we put him somewhere we can watch every angle. And we wait for Finch to come to him. And while he's focused on me in Oregon, Leo added, your teams in North Carolina can secure my parents, and your teams in Seattle can raid Acoustic Shadow, and you can corner Clara. We draw the queen out of position so you can take the king. Sanderson was silent for a long moment, staring at Leo. He saw not the terrified victim he had met a week ago, but a man forged into something hard and sharp by the ordeal. "It's a hell of a risk," the detective said finally. "If we miscalculate, if he senses a trap, you're dead." "He's been in my head for months," Leo said, his voice steady. "It's time I got into his." The plan was set in motion with a chilling efficiency. The stage they chose was a remote fishing lodge on the Oregon coast, near Tillamook. It was the off-season, the lodge officially closed for renovations, its handful of cabins scattered among a dense grove of Sitka spruce overlooking a desolate stretch of gray, churning ocean. It was isolated with only one road in and out, making it a perfect, controllable trap. Leo, under the official guise of witness relocation, was moved to the main lodge. The place smelled of cold wood smoke and salt. Sanderson's team, a dozen plainclothes officers from his most trusted unit, swarmed the area in the days leading up to his arrival. They posed as a construction crew, their vans filled with surveillance equipment instead of lumber. Microcameras were hidden in the trees, in the light fixtures of the cabins, in the knots of the lodge's rustic wooden walls. Pressure plates and infrared sensors were buried under the damp forest floor. The entire area was wired for sound. They turned the tranquil wilderness into a high-tech spiderweb. Leo's role was to be the picture of a man unraveling. Alana crafted a narrative that was carefully leaked through a trusted but notoriously gossipy court clerk. The story was that Leo Vance, the key witness in the Portland Phantom case, had suffered a severe psychological break under police protection. He'd had a violent outburst, fired his lawyer, and refused to cooperate further. He'd been released against medical and legal advice and had fled to an old family friend's lodge on the coast to hide. It was a story designed to appeal to Finch's ego, a confirmation that his methods had worked after all, that Leo was just another broken subject. Leo played his part. He left the Justice Center in a public, agitated display, arguing with Sanderson in the parking garage. He drove his own Honda CR-V, now fitted with a silent tracking device, to the coast. He checked into the lodge, his movements deliberately erratic, his face a mask of paranoia and exhaustion. He spent his days walking the beach, always looking over his shoulder, or sitting in the lodge's great room, staring into the cold fireplace. He felt like an actor in the most important and terrifying role of his life. For 3 days there was nothing. The wind howled around the lodge, rattling the windows. The ocean crashed against the shore. The waiting was its own form of torture, a slow drip of anxiety that felt eerily similar to his time in the duplex. He was in a cage again, but this time he had helped build it. He spoke with his parents every night on a secure line. They were safe, surrounded by a federal protection detail, but they were terrified for him. His father's voice was heavy with a guilt that Leo tried his best to assuage. "This isn't your fault, Dad," he'd said. "You did the right thing 25 years ago. This is about them, not us." On the 4th night, there was a flicker. A surveillance camera on the main road picked up a vehicle at 2 a.m., a dark-colored van with no license plates. It didn't drive up to the lodge. It pulled over 2 miles down the road, deep in the forest, and killed its lights. Sanderson's voice crackled in the tiny, flesh-colored earpiece Leo wore. "We have a visitor. Subject is deploying on foot. Thermal shows one signature, moving through the trees, heading your way. He's avoiding the road. He's good. He's very good." Leo was in the main lodge, sitting in a worn armchair, a book open on his lap. His heart was a trip hammer. "Is it Finch?" "We can't get a visual yet," Sanderson replied, his voice calm and low. "Stay in character. He'll be watching the lodge. He needs to believe you're alone and unaware." The minutes stretched into an hour. Leo forced himself to read, to turn the pages, to sip from a mug of cold tea. All the while, Sanderson's team gave a quiet, running commentary in his ear. "Subject is bypassing the west perimeter. He's moving parallel to the creek. He's stopped. He's observing. He's moving again. He's approaching the cabins from the rear, using them for cover. He's a pro." Leo could feel the unseen presence out in the darkness, a familiar, suffocating weight. Finch was here. He was stalking the grounds, studying the layout, looking for a way in. He was a predator and he was hunting. "He's at cabin 4, the voice in his ear whispered. "He's jimmying the lock. He's inside." Leo looked out the large picture window of the lodge, across the manicured clearing to the row of dark, silent cabins. One of them was now occupied. Finch was using it as a forward operating base, a place to watch and wait for the perfect moment to strike. The night wore on. Finch made no further moves. He was patient. He was waiting for Leo to go to sleep, for the house to be still. Around 3:30 a.m., following Sanderson's instructions, Leo stood up, stretched, and headed to his bedroom on the second floor of the lodge. He turned off the main lights, leaving only a small lamp burning. He got into bed, the earpiece a cold lump against his skin. "He's still in cabin 4, Sanderson said. "The lights are off. He's using night vision, watching your window. Be ready, Leo. The show is about to start." Another hour passed in absolute silence. Leo lay in the dark, his senses on fire. And then he heard it. A faint, familiar sound. A soft sigh of a floorboard from the room next to his. His blood turned to ice. It was impossible. The room next door was empty. The entire lodge was supposed to be secure. "Sanderson," he whispered, his voice barely a tremor. "He's in the lodge. He's in the room next to me." There was a moment of confused silence on the other end. "Negative, Leo. That's impossible. All entrances are covered. He's still in cabin 4. We have him on thermal." Another sound. The soft click of a door handle turning. It was coming from inside his room, from his closet. Leo's mind flashed back to the duplex, to the door in the back of his closet, to the secret passage. Couldn't be. Not here. "He's not in the room next door?" Leo breathed, a horrifying realization dawning. "He's been here the whole time. He was never in the van. That was a decoy." The closet door began to creak open. "Leo, what's happening?" Sanderson demanded, his voice sharp with alarm. Leo didn't have time to answer. A tall, thin figure emerged from the shadows of the closet, a figure he had only seen from a distance. Alistair Finch. He was dressed in black, and in his hand he held a silenced pistol, pointed directly at Leo's chest. "Hello, Leo," Finch said, his voice calm and quiet, a perfect match for the dispassionate prose in his notebook. "You've been a fascinating subject. Truly. Far more entertaining than the others." "How?" Leo managed to choke out. Finch smiled, a thin, mirthless expression. "Old buildings always have secrets. When I learned you were being moved here, I looked up the original blueprints. This lodge, like your duplex, was built in the 1920s. It was a hunting lodge for a wealthy industrialist who valued his privacy and his security. There's a network of service passages inside the walls. I've been here for 2 days, listening." He gestured with the gun. "Your police friends are very good, but they're looking for an external threat. They never thought to look inside the house. Now get up." Slowly. In Leo's ear, all hell was breaking loose. "He's inside. All units, converge on the main lodge. Go, go, go." Finch's smile widened. "A little late for that, I'm afraid." He pulled a small device from his pocket and pressed a button. A high-pitched squeal filled Leo's earpiece, followed by static, then silence. A jammer. He was cut off. "It's just you and me now, Leo," Finch said. "The way it was always meant to be. We have a project to finish." He motioned with the gun toward the door. "We're going for a walk." Leo knew that if he left that room, he was dead. He had one chance, one desperate gambit. His eyes darted to the heavy glass lamp on his nightstand. "Clara sent you, didn't she?" Leo said, stalling, trying to keep him talking. "This is all for her." Finch's expression soured slightly. "Clara is a means to an end, a useful tool, driven by a rather pedestrian need for revenge. My interests are more professional. You ruined a very elegant, very expensive operation, and for that there are consequences." As he spoke, Leo moved his hand, ever so slowly, toward the lamp. "What are you going to do?" Finch asked, his eyes tracking the movement. "Throw that at me? Please. We're past the point of such clumsy theatrics." "No," Leo said, his fingers brushing the cool glass. "I'm not." And then he did something Finch couldn't have anticipated. He didn't throw the lamp. He swept it off the table, smashing it against the floor. But his other hand shot out and grabbed the electrical cord, ripping it from the wall socket. In one fluid motion, he jammed the exposed, live prongs of the plug into the metallic mesh of the closet door's hinge. There was a brilliant blue flash, a loud crackle, and the acrid smell of burning ozone. The lights in the room flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. He had shorted out the entire circuit. In the sudden, disorienting blackness, Leo dove off the bed, rolling across the floor. A silenced gunshot puffed near his head, the bullet thudding into the wall behind him. He scrambled on all fours, his hands sweeping the floor, searching for anything, any weapon. His fingers closed around a heavy, jagged piece of the broken lamp base. He could hear Finch moving in the dark, his footsteps cautious, hunting. Leo held his breath, pressing himself against the wall. The only light was the faint, gray moonlight filtering through the window. "Impressive," Finch's voice whispered from the darkness. "You continue to deviate from the profile. I'm genuinely going to be sorry to end this experiment." Leo heard a floorboard creak to his left. He lunged, swinging the shard of glass in a wild, desperate arc. He felt it connect with something, followed by a sharp intake of breath from Finch. He had hit him. Finch fired again, the shot going wide in the dark. Leo scrambled away, putting the bed between them. He could hear Finch's ragged breathing. "You can't hide, Leo," Finch hissed, a note of anger finally entering his calm voice. Just then, the night erupted. The sound of splintering wood as the lodge's front door was battered down. Shouts. "Police! Drop your weapon!" Sanderson's team had arrived. Finch knew the game was up. He moved to the window, smashed the glass with the butt of his pistol, and prepared to climb out. Leo saw his chance. He wouldn't let him escape. Not again. He charged from behind the bed, a guttural roar tearing from his throat, and tackled Finch with all the force he could muster. They crashed into the wall together, the impact rattling his teeth. The gun flew from Finch's hand, skittering across the floor. They grappled in the dark, a desperate, clumsy fight. Finch was wiry and surprisingly strong, his fingers digging into Leo's throat. Leo's vision started to spot. He swung the glass shard again, blindly, connecting with Finch's side. The man grunted in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Leo twisted, breaking free, and threw a punch that landed squarely on Finch's jaw. The door to the bedroom burst open and the beam of a dozen flashlights flooded the room, pinning them in a harsh, white glare. "Police! Get down on the ground! Now!" Finch, bleeding from his side and his arm, his face a mask of fury and disbelief, looked at Leo. He opened his mouth to say something, but then his eyes went wide. He wasn't looking at Leo anymore. He was looking past him at the window. Standing on the roof just outside the broken window, silhouetted against the moon, was a figure. It was a woman. Her blonde hair was wild in the wind. It was Clara, and she was holding a gun. "No loose ends, Alistair," she said, her voice flat and cold. She wasn't pointing the gun at Leo. She was pointing it at Finch. Before anyone could react, she fired twice. The silenced shots were barely audible over the shouting of the police. Finch crumpled to the floor, his eyes wide with the ultimate surprise. Clara took one last look at Leo, her face devoid of any emotion he could recognize. And then she simply stepped backward off the roof, disappearing into the night. Sanderson was the first one to the window. He peered out into the darkness. "She's gone," he said, rappelled down the side of the building. She was his backup, or his executioner. Leo stood there, shaking, breathing in the cold night air, surrounded by the chaos of the police raid. He looked down at the body of Alistair Finch, the man who had haunted his every waking moment. The phantom was dead, but the architect of it all was still out there, a ghost in the wind. The game wasn't over. It had just entered a new, more terrifying stage. The aftermath at the lodge was a blur of flashing lights, crackling radios, and the methodical movements of the crime scene unit. Leo sat wrapped in a thick wool blanket in the back of an ambulance, a paramedic checking his vitals while he stared into the dark woods. He felt strangely calm, the adrenaline having scoured him clean, leaving behind a hollow, ringing clarity. He had survived. Alistair Finch, the man they had called Julian, was gone, but his death felt less like a victory and more like the turning of a page. The real author of his nightmare was still out there. In the days that followed, Leo was kept in a secure debriefing facility outside of Portland. With Alana by his side, he recounted every detail of the final confrontation to a grim-faced Detective Sanderson. The trap had worked, but it had also failed. Finch was dead, but Clara had been a ghost, appearing and disappearing with terrifying precision, leaving them with nothing but 2 shell casings and a clean getaway. "She played us all," Sanderson said, pacing the small, sterile room. "She used Finch to do the dirty work, but she must have had her own surveillance on the situation, her own contingency plan. When we cornered him, she cut her losses and eliminated the only person who could directly tie her to the operation. She needed him," Leo said, his voice flat, "but she never trusted him." He remembered the cold, detached way she had looked at him before vanishing. There was no flicker of their shared past, no remorse, no hatred. There was nothing. It was the look one gives to a problem being solved. The declassification hearing in Washington, D.C. was less than a week away. The pressure was immense. "She'll have to act fast," Alana reasoned, "and she'll have to get her hands dirty herself. Her subtle plan is in ashes. Now it's about brute force. She'll try to stop your father from testifying. The protection detail in North Carolina is airtight," Sanderson assured them, "but she's proven to be resourceful. We can't be sure she won't find a way through." They were in a stalemate. They were protecting against a threat, but they couldn't find the threat itself. Clara Webb had vanished. Her credit cards were unused. Her known associates had no information. She was as much a phantom as Finch had ever been. "We're playing defense," Leo said quietly, looking at his hands. "We need to make her come to us." "We tried that," Sanderson countered. "It almost got you killed." "Because we were trying to trap Finch?" Leo said, looking up, a new, hard light in his eyes. Finch was a professional. He was driven by logic, process, and ego. We appealed to his sense of superiority. But Clara is different. She's a professional, yes, but underneath it all, this is personal. It's about a 25-year-old grudge. It's about her father. It's about my father. It's about family. He leaned forward. "She spent 6 years of her life pretending to love me. She built a world around me. You don't do that, you don't maintain that level of deception without a deep, obsessive emotional core driving you. We can't trap the professional. We have to trap the daughter." "How?" Alana asked. Leo reached into his own memory, into the carefully constructed life they had shared. He thought of the quiet moments, the inside jokes, the shared history that he now knew was a lie, and he found it, the one piece of bait she couldn't resist. "The locket," he said, "the one Finch had in the wall, the one I gave her for our 3rd anniversary." Sanderson frowned. "It's in an evidence locker, Leo." "Get it," Leo insisted. "She thinks I'm broken, hiding in a police bunker. We're going to let her know that I want to see her. One last time, to get closure, to give her back the last piece of the life we had." "She'll never fall for it," Sanderson said. "She knows you're with us." "She will," Leo said with certainty, "because it appeals to her real motivation. It's not enough for her to win the contract or ruin my father. She needs to see that she won. She needs to look at the wreckage she created. She needs to see me, shattered, handing her back the symbol of her deception. That's a victory she won't be able to refuse." The plan was audacious, and it was approved with reluctance. The final stage was set not in Oregon, but in Sacramento, the city where the lie had been born. They chose a small, public park along the river, a place where Leo and Clara had often walked. The police presence was even heavier than at the lodge, but it was practically invisible. Snipers on rooftops, undercover officers disguised as joggers, as parents with strollers, as homeless men on benches. Leo sat on their bench, the one overlooking a bend in the river. The silver locket felt heavy and cold in his pocket. This time there was no earpiece, no live commentary. There was only the plan and the waiting. An hour passed. Leo watched the river flow, the afternoon sun glinting off the water. He began to think it had failed, that he had miscalculated her. And then he saw her. She was walking toward him along the path, dressed in simple jeans and a dark blue jacket, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked like any other person enjoying a day at the park. She looked like the Clara he remembered. She stopped a few feet from the bench, her eyes taking him in. There was a faint, triumphant curl to her lips. "Leo," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "I was surprised to get your message. I didn't think you'd want to see me. I needed to," he said, his voice quiet, playing the part of the broken man. "I needed to understand why." She sat on the far end of the bench, leaving a careful distance between them. "Why? Because your father is a self-righteous fool who destroyed my family. And I believe that debts should always be paid." 6 years, Clara," he whispered. "Was any of it real?" She gave a small, dismissive shrug. "It was a role. A long one, I'll admit. But the performance is over. You were a convincing scene partner, I'll give you that." There was no remorse in her eyes, only a chilling, profound emptiness, the hollow space where a conscience should have been. "This is yours," he said, pulling the locket from his pocket. He held it out to her, letting it swing gently on its chain. "I don't want it anymore." Her eyes fixed on the locket, the silver catching the light. It was the trophy, the final proof of her victory. She reached out to take it. As her fingers brushed against his, she smiled a genuine, cruel smile. "It's a shame, really," she said softly. "We could have been happy in another life." "No," Leo said, his voice suddenly hard, all pretense of being broken gone. He closed his hand around the locket, his grip firm. "We couldn't have." Her smile faltered. Confusion flickered in her eyes. And in that moment, the park seemed to hold its breath. The jogger on the path stopped jogging. The man on the nearby bench slowly folded his newspaper. The young couple with the stroller turned, and the woman's hand went to her ear. Clara saw it. Her eyes darted around, the trap closing in her mind. The color drained from her face. She stood up, ready to run, but there was nowhere to go. "It's over, Clara," Leo said, standing up to face her. He let the locket drop from his hand. It fell to the ground between them with a soft, final little clink. 2 uniformed officers stepped out from behind a large oak tree, their weapons lowered but ready. Detective Sanderson walked calmly down the path toward them. Clara looked at Leo, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The emptiness was finally filled. The epilogue of his life in Portland was written in courtrooms and lawyers' offices. Clara Webb, faced with overwhelming evidence and Leo's unshakable testimony, was convicted of conspiracy, aggravated harassment, and accessory to the crimes of Alastair Finch. Titan Construction was embroiled in a new, even bigger scandal, and their dam project was dead forever. Leo never went back to the duplex. He let the landlord keep his deposit. He hired movers to pack up his life, instructing them to throw most of it away. He needed a new start, a real one this time. 6 months later, he was living in a small, rented house in a quiet town on the central Oregon coast. It was a new house with no secret history, no shared walls. The air smelled of salt and pine. He worked, he took long walks on the beach, and he slowly began to piece himself back together. He was not the same man. The grief and loneliness that had once defined him had been replaced by a quiet, resilient strength. He was more cautious, more observant. He saw the world in greater detail now, understood the hidden spaces that could exist just beneath the surface of a normal life. The fear was gone, but a permanent vigilance remained. It was a scar he knew he would always carry. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howled and the house creaked, his heart would still skip a beat. But he no longer feared the sounds. He would simply get up, walk through his small, silent home, and check the locks on the doors. Not out of fear of a phantom in the walls, but with the calm, earned knowledge that the most dangerous monsters are the ones you invite inside. They say every story has an echo, that the sounds and words can attract the attention of something. Can you feel it now? That cold spot on the back of your neck? That's the echo of this story, looking for you. Give this video a like if you felt it, and subscribe if you want to find out what other echoes we can awaken together. Just remember, when you turn off the lights, listen carefully. Sometimes, you can hear more than you were meant to. Sleep well.